Hello, everyone, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, no matter where you are in the world. And I know people join us from all over the place. So, welcome to those of you who are joining us. Now, of course, I'm going to be bringing on our special guest for the day, Leanda de Lisle, in a moment, and we're going to be diving in to look at some of Elizabeth's rivals and very interesting stories they are too. And I'm really looking forward to chatting to Leanda, particularly about the Grey sisters, because it's not an area I've done a huge amount of research on, and the stories are fascinating. So I hope you are looking forward to that too. And so, yes, if you are joining us, I can see people have already given us a thumbs up. So I'm hoping that you can hear and see me okay. Do let me know. Do give me a thumbs up or a heart and drop a comment into the chat box. And then I can know that you're all hearing us okay. And just to say, yes, who do we have? Kathy. Oh, lovely Kathy. Hello, Kathy. How are you? How's things in your part of the world today? And you're saying, I know the most about Jane, then Mary and Catherine, but would love to know more. Well, me too. So we're in good company here today. So, yes, do let me know if you are joining us today, where you are in the world. Do say hello. And as we get into the chat today, what's going to happen is we've got about an hour with Leanda, and what will happen then is I'll kick off with just a few questions, but I'll be keeping an eye on the chat there to look at your questions coming through. And I'll make sure to try and ask as many of those as possible to Leanda in the time we have available. We'll start wrapping up about 10 to 6. Just so I can give you a couple of updates on what's coming next, and we will try and finish promptly on the hour at 6 o'clock here in the UK. So a couple of other people have been joining us while I've been talking. So hello, Marsha. So you're in New Hampshire, you're visiting. So do you live in the US or are you traveling from overseas? And Anna, lovely to see you. Anna here in the UK. And Kathy's saying it's cold and snowy in, oh, we haven't got snow here yet. It's quite mild here at the moment. I'm not looking forward to that. So Gail, hello Gail, lovely to see you, and the lovely Monica in Italy, and hello Susan from Illinois. So we've got a few people over in the US, we've got Europe and the UK represented so far today. That's lovely. So just to say, for those of you who are maybe new or listening to this on catch up, and this is the first time you've come to these live chats, Tudor Talk, you'll be able to see my QR code. That's for Instagram. So I do most of my social media on Instagram. So if you want to follow my journeys and updates, then just make sure that you point your mobile phone at your camera at that, and hopefully that will take you through to my Instagram profile. Okay, well, I think that it is time to get on with the business of today. So I want to, first of all, give a little intro to our esteemed guest for today. As you know, it's Leanda de Lisle, and Leanda started her career as a journalist, but is now an author of historic non-fiction, particularly Tudor and Stuart. And I suppose the couple of books that are particularly interested to us Tudor lovers here are Sisters Who Would Be Queen, which is very pertinent for tonight's discussion, and Tudor, the Family Story. So I'm sure some of you have read those books, and maybe you have questions about Elizabeth's rivals. So with that, let me bring on Leanda. Hello, Leanda. Lovely to see you.
Hello, lovely to see you as well. It's been
Hello. Now, I'm just wondering, you sound quite quiet before we go on. I'm going to turn the volume up at this end. Could you just check in and make sure that the volume is okay?
hello. Does that sound better?
I think that's a little bit better. Yes, I've turned the volume up here. Folks, let me know if we need to do any adjustments with the volume to go. But lovely to have you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Leanda.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
And what part of the UK do you live in? Where are you based, roughly?
I'm here in what is actually sunny Leicestershire. It's been very sunny today. It's been a beautiful, well, I suppose it's a winter's day, but it looks like a sort of mid-autumn day. It's golden sunshine. It's been lovely.
Oh, great. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Yes, it's been quite mild, hasn't it, so far? We haven't been hit by winter yet at the moment.
No, exactly. No, that's something to look forward to, I suppose.
So let's dive in. We were chatting, of course, deciding what we were going to do today, and you said let's do Elizabeth's rivals. What a great topic that is! I was been doing my little bit of research, and the more I've read about it, the more intrigued. It's been a while since I've read, particularly about the Grey sisters, so it was fun to read about them again. But I wondered if you could tell us though, what got you interested in writing about the Tudors in the first instance?
Well, I read history at university, and I always enjoyed the story of the Tudors. I mean, it's just so full of sort of drama and excitement, a time of sort of seismic change, of wonderful personalities. What's not to like, really? It's
Yeah.
just a great period.
It's got everything, hasn't it? It really does. The glamour, the drama, the yes, intrigue, it's everything. And we're going to be talking, of course, about Elizabeth's rivals today, particularly, I guess, Mary, Queen of Scots and the Grey sisters. Are they amongst your favourite characters, or do you have other really, characters from Tudor history that really grab your attention, maybe that you haven't written about yet?
Margaret Beaufort, I enjoyed very much writing. I wrote about in Tudor, the family story. I started right back in the Wars of the Roses with with Margaret Beaufort and indeed Owen Tudor, even before her, who was the sort of founder in a way of the dynasty, who was this sort of obscure Welshman who fell into a queen's lap at a party. I mean, I loved him. He was an extraordinary character. I like Margaret Beaufort as well. I enjoy reading, I suppose, about people who have been very maligned, as Margaret Beaufort was, and really looking at their lives, and trying to see their point of view, their perspective. So I enjoyed that. Anne Boleyn is eternally fascinating. Who can't be fascinated
Yeah.
by Anne Boleyn and indeed her daughter Elizabeth? Um, Gosh, favourites. I was very interested in Frances Brandon, one of Henry VIII's nieces, who is another of Elizabeth's rivals. No, well, she was a bit earlier, and she was interesting as well. Jane's mother, who was also very much maligned.
Well, it
Um,
was interesting because I watched your video on your website
yes,
today and I enjoyed hearing you talk about Frances Brandon. And
yes,
maybe that will come up a little bit more as we chat because we
yes,
do see her as the wicked stepmother, don't we, to the Grey sisters?
absolutely, absolutely.
And
So I'm always interested in, as I said, in re-looking at the past, I'm trying to see where myths have been created, and to tear away the myths to find the real people and the real story.
that's
That's
lots of fun. Very satisfying as well to do so. Okay, so let's get right into the heart of it. So Elizabeth comes to the throne 1558. Who are her main contenders for the crown at that point? Who would be her rivals?
well, there is, as you mentioned earlier, Mary, Queen of Scots. She is Elizabeth's senior heir in blood. Um, but that is under sort of English common law, except, first of all, she was foreign born, so that could in itself preclude her from the throne. And secondly, she has been demoted in Henry VIII's will, which has the backing of English statute. Um, so, in a way, her more dangerous rivals, and the ones she personally perceives as more dangerous, are her Protestant English heirs, Lady Catherine and Lady Mary Grey. They're both English born, and they are her heirs in English statute, in English law. So she's very anxious about them. And in particular, she's very concerned that they not marry and produce a son if she does not.
Hmm. So we'll come to the Grey sisters, and in fact, maybe we'll spend more time on them because I think it's the Grey sisters that everybody knows quite a lot about. Mary, Queen of Scots. You mentioned Mary, Queen of Scots. Most people who love Tudor history could tell you some of the highlights of her career. But I think if a lot of people were asked to tell me about the story of the Grey sisters, I think a lot of people would not be so sure of their facts. So I think it'd be good to spend a bit more time on them. But let's just do Mary, Queen of Scots first. Um, so I suppose one of the things that I've always wondered about was, how real was the threat of Mary Queen of Scots to Elizabeth's stability? I mean, they were such different characters with different upbringings, different conditions to deal with. Was she ever really truly a threat to Elizabeth?
She became a very real threat. Well, she was always a threat. She was, after all, a monarch in her own right. She had the potential backing of France, so she was certainly a dangerous figure in that way. And then, after the death of Lady Katherine Grey, when she was only 28, she became more dangerous because the principal, Elizabeth's principal rival, as she saw her, Catherine, was dead, and Elizabeth had bastardized her children, and so Mary Mary became a much more imminent threat. She was, however, that very same year, which was 1568 from memory, she arrived in England and was imprisoned. So Elizabeth, I suppose, had control of her. But nevertheless, it was possible that she could escape, that or that that she might find backing in England, as indeed she did.
Hmm. And I just noticed a couple of people are saying about the sound. I'm just addressing somebody saying your sound is okay, mine's a bit quieter. So I've turned my sound up, folks. So just let me know if it's too if I've put it up too much, or whether it's coming across okay, or whether I need to put it up a little bit more. Okay, so we know the story of, obviously Mary loses her crown in Scotland. She's forced to abdicate. She flees to England, and then she has this long and sorry imprisonment
Yes.
in England, constantly trying to get an audience with Elizabeth. And I think one of those perennial questions that people ask is, would it have made any difference if the two had met? Would it change the outcome? What do you think?
I think that's a very interesting question. The truth is that Mary's great enemies were the people around Elizabeth, and it certainly wouldn't have changed their point of view. That's where the real danger to her lay, with people like William Cecil, who were absolutely determined that a Catholic not inherit the English throne. Elizabeth, I think, was actually slightly less concerned about that. And I think she very much wanted relations between her and Mary to be good if she felt secure. I think she felt a sort of sisterly feeling in a way for Mary. The fact they were both queens. They were both in this incredibly difficult situation of being women ruling in a man's world, and that was very much disliked in both Scotland and England. And so, and if they had met, I don't know, Mary was very charming. It's possible she could have charmed Elizabeth. But Elizabeth would have had to have stuck her neck out almost literally to have saved Mary, and Elizabeth was a survivor at the end of the day. Why, in the end of the day, she chopped off her cousin's head.
Yeah, and as you quite rightly point out, the likes of Cecil and Walsingham were so committed to the Protestant cause. It's very hard to see that the outcome would have been changed, because surely Elizabeth would have continued to not defer to, but listen to men she trusted and was inclined to trust. That's where the relationship was.
Yes, well, the danger would have been as well that they would have turned against her. If she had committed to Mary, Queen of Scots, inheriting the throne, they might have turned against her. That was always a threat. Don't forget, William Cecil had worked, was Jane Grey's Secretary of State. Jane Grey, who usurped the throne from not only Mary Tudor, people forget, also Elizabeth Tudor. But Elizabeth did not forget that, ever. Never trusted the English elite. She put her faith in the ordinary people, as she always said. It was to them she owed her crown. And so I think she would have been nervous that even Cecil, who was so loyal, inverted commas, might not have been so loyal if she had decided that Mary Queen of Scots should be confirmed as her heir, or strengthened her place too much.
Yeah. And so we get to the end, which of course is Mary's execution at Fotheringhay. Elizabeth signed the document, although of course she would later protest that she didn't mean to have it happen. But did she and was she right to put Elizabeth to death?
To put Mary to death? Well,
sorry, Mary. Sorry, yeah.
That's yeah, I think yes. What was the manner of it, really? What Elizabeth wanted to do and tried to do was to have Mary murdered. This was the traditional way of disposing of a fallen monarch. It had been done many times before. And then, what would happen was usually they would be murdered. Say someone like Henry VI, for example, was murdered. And then in his case, it was announced that he had died of grief and rage. So it always been announced, oh dear, they've died of a head cold, or oh dear, they've died of an emotional fit, or whatever. So what she would have liked to have done is had Mary murdered and then announced, oh dear, she's died of, whatever, a bad moment. And natural causes, anyway, of some kind. And then the idea would be that that Mary's former supporters would unite behind Elizabeth, but the people she asked to do it wouldn't carry out her orders, which is quite interesting, because if Henry VIII had ordered such a thing, you can be damn sure they would have been carried out.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a sign. We forget, because she was such an extraordinary woman and such an extraordinary queen, the weakness of her position as a woman, the weakness of her position, that she was just she was just told no, not doing that. And because she was Mary Queen of Scots was tried and then executed, it sort of touched on the sort of divinity of the monarch. Elizabeth realized that's why she didn't want it done. And there's a line you can draw from the execution of Mary Queen of Scots to the execution of her grandson Charles I. I mean, at the time they used an excuse. They said, because she was accused of treason, but you obviously, she wasn't a subject of Elizabeth, so you can't actually commit treason against, a fellow, somebody from another country like that. But they said that Scotland was essentially a subject nation, which I think the Scots would have questioned. But that's the excuse they used. So yes, but.
And when you say you can draw a line between Mary's execution and that of Charles I, what do you mean by that?
It was like a sort of dry run, you might say. They executed. They once they took the head off tried and executed one monarch. It wasn't going to be so difficult to do it again. I mean, they sort of twisted the law and history to try and execute Mary for treason, and they just twisted it a bit more to try and execute a king of England as opposed to a queen of Scotland.
Yeah, right. Just taking it one step up, just one notch further. Not so hard, as you say. It's only one notch. You're not going from ground zero. I just want to pause again, because I've had a couple. Shannon and Emma, I'm hearing you. I have tried to increase my sound, and if you see me leaning slightly over in this direction, it's because my microphone's here. So I'm not quite sure. Normally, I don't have any problems being heard. Or with my microphone, but I've put everything up to 100, so I can't take it anymore. I really hope you can hear me okay, and if there's any problem with the sound being a little bit low, my massive apologies for that. But importantly, you can hear Leanda, and Leanda is by far the most important person for you to hear this evening. Okay, I have kind of raced through Mary Queen of Scots, because as I said at the beginning, Leandra, I'm actually really keen to get to the Grey sisters. And folks, if you have any questions about the Grey sisters as we're going, please do note them down. I'd be very happy to ask Leander them on your behalf. So let's start from basics with the Grey sisters. Everybody's heard of Lady Jane Grey, but she had two sisters. Can you tell us just a snapshot about them and about the family? Who were they? In particular, who were they in relation to Elizabeth as she ascended the throne?
Well, their mother was Henry VIII's niece. So they were all of sort of Tudor descent. But they were descended from Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary, the French queen, who married Charles Brandon, Henry VIII's bestie.
How could we forget?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So they were his grandchildren. They were Charles Brandon's grandchildren, the grandchildren of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, whereas Mary Queen of Scots was descended from the elder sister. And so that's who they were. And when Henry VIII was dying, he decided to make them the long stop heirs, the heirs to Elizabeth. And I think the reason was he was thinking of the fate of the princes in the Tower, who we forget sometimes were his uncles, his uncle, his mother's brothers. And he didn't want the same fate for his young son, the future Edward VI, who was also a little boy. He realized, he was dying. His son was going to be a boy king. He didn't want a powerful adult royal or as a threat, a sort of Richard III type threat to his son. And so he wanted to have weak heirs. So he kept his daughters illegitimate and unmarried. They were both put in the line of succession illegitimate, and he didn't have them, either of them married, as he obviously. And then he made the long stop heirs, these little girls, as they were then, so girls, not boys, and quite remote under sort of common law. So he wanted to have these weak heirs. Then, when his son was dying himself, aged only 15, Edward decided to exclude both his sisters. He didn't want his sister Mary succeeding to the throne because she was a Catholic and he was a Protestant, and he excluded her on the grounds that she was illegitimate. Elizabeth was also illegitimate, so he excluded her as well, and he passed the cousins straight to the long stop heir, the senior one, who was Jane. And then, of course, as it turned out, well, everyone expected Mary Tudor to just sort of give way to this. I think the imperial ambassador, who was supposed to be her greatest ally, just said, "Oh, she's only a woman." Basically, doesn't stand a chance. But of course, she was the sort of granddaughter of Isabella of Castile. So, and not to mention the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, both of whom were sort of warrior queens in a way.
Yes.
And Mary's, as we all know, raised an army, and the people rose up for her. She took the throne, and poor old Jane was overthrown and then eventually executed after another rebellion. Catherine and Mary, at that point, she then she was strange in some ways, quite forgiving, Mary, having admittedly sort of executed this poor teenage girl, Jane. So she took them in as her ladies in waiting. Catherine became, quite a sort of, was served quite intimately on Mary, and was back at court, and they were sort of well looked after until Elizabeth became queen, and then suddenly everything changed, because, as I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth was very concerned that these girls were her heirs in law. They were therefore in a very powerful position. She'd already seen how the elite around her brother, Edward VI, had excluded her from the throne, along with her elder sister. And she realized that they didn't want to have a queen, they wanted to have a king. If she didn't marry and produce a son, and one of these nice little Protestant princesses did, then it was quite possible that she would be overthrown and replaced with them. Catherine was a very pretty girl, teenage girl at this stage. She was 18. Elizabeth didn't know she was already falling in love with an entirely suitable man, Edward Seymour, who was a son of the Protector Somerset, who'd introduced Protestantism to England. He even had some royal blood, I can't remember quite where. But anyway, he was the ideal sort of consort for an English Protestant queen. So Elizabeth, when she became queen, she demoted Catherine out of the sort of presence chamber to sort of a more obscure role, in the hopes of sending out a message to people. I don't want you to be nice to Catherine. She's not important. She's very unimportant. Catherine was obviously aware that Elizabeth didn't want her to get married, so she kept her romance with Ned, as she called him, secret. But they did marry also in secret. And there are wonderful descriptions, I mean, extraordinary descriptions, actually, which you just don't normally get in this at this period. Because they were later arrested and cross-examined, we have these transcripts and things which give us incredible details of the secret wedding, right down to how they made love on their wedding night.
Oh,
You know, how they lay on one side of the bed and then the other, what she was wearing and not wearing. I mean, unbelievable detail.
And where's that detail? What documents are those details in, I should say?
Well, I mean, you know, they're in sort of manuscripts of the transcripts of the interviews that they underwent in the Tower.
Ah, right. Okay. So so it was recorded later. How fascinating. How wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone was interviewed, yeah. So we know, you know, how they celebrated. You know, obviously, very. It was a very private, secret wedding. But then what happened is, you know, they're both young, obviously, and very much in love, and quite randy, basically. So they were having, you know, sex secretly all over the place. In every sort of palace in England, really. And unsurprisingly, I think that William Cecil, who was related to Catherine, was aware something was going on, and so had Ned, and was worried that Elizabeth would find out and it'd all end in tears, and so had Ned packed off abroad on a nice long holiday, lovely holiday, a nice tour of Europe. But unfortunately, Catherine was already pregnant. And she didn't say anything. I think you can imagine, she's a young girl, she's terrified. She's hoping that she's not really pregnant. It's not really happening. But, you know, as every month passes, she gets bigger and bigger and bigger, until, you know, she's essentially 8.5 months pregnant.
Oh.
People are beginning to whisper, and she doesn't know what to do. And so she goes and talks to her former brother-in-law, who is Dudley, Robert Dudley, who, of course, is the Queen's in love with, Elizabeth's in love with. And we forget that, actually, of course, because her brother-in-law, Guildford Dudley, was married to Jane. So his, you know,
Of course,
Robert
of course, of course. Yes, you do forget
They're
all these
all
connections.
family. They're all family, exactly.
Yeah.
So she went to see him because she knows, oh well, he's you know, he's Guildford's, poor old Guildford's executed, but he's Guildford's brother. He might help me. He'll put in a good word with the Queen, so she's not too cross. And so she goes and sees him, and they're on a sort of progress, a royal progress, and then he goes to tell Elizabeth.
So he does the deed. He's the one that actually does the deed. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He goes and tells her, and Elizabeth just goes ballistic, you know, completely understandably. I mean, because it's her worst nightmare.
Yeah.
It's her worst nightmare. Her heir, well, actually, she doesn't want this girl to be her heir in English statute is married to a very suitable husband and is pregnant. Oh my God. So Catherine is sent straight to the Tower. And Ned is recalled from, you know, having his lovely time in Europe, and also packed off to the Tower, where Catherine promptly gives birth to a little boy.
Even worse.
Even worse. So this is like a major disaster.
Can I ask what she was? I mean, was she just sent to the Tower because Elizabeth wanted her there, or was it because she had married without permission? Is that the kind of pretense on which she was packed off to the Tower?
Yes, absolutely. That was, you know, I don't think, it was fleetingly a treasonous offence to marry without royal permission, but I think that was with that law was revoked, I think, by Mary Tudor. Anyway, Elizabeth obviously just decided no one was going to stop her on this one, I tell you.
I mean, it's very harsh, isn't it? It's very, very harsh. Anyway, sorry, no. I'm interrupting the story, but I'm sitting here going, wow, I'm just reminded how remarkable this story is. Anyway, yes, please carry on.
So they, because of course the marriage was secret, they can't find the priest. The person who was witness, the girl who was witness, was Ned's sister, another Jane Seymour, and who has unfortunately died. So Elizabeth says there's no evidence there was ever a marriage, and has this little boy declared illegitimate. So that seems okay. That seems like a bit of a relief for Elizabeth. But then the lieutenant of the tower and the servants in the tower, all quite sympathetic to Catherine and Ned, to their romance and everything. And so almost unbelievably, I mean, it is sort of gobsmacking, really. They allow a certain amount of corridor creeping in the tower. So you have Ned going to visit Catherine. And again, we have details of what, as far as I remember, there was striped satin stuff on the bed. Anyway, there's literally descriptions of the bed, and there's a letter Catherine writes later to Ned, describing the last time he came to her and how she longs to be with him again. Which again is an extraordinary letter. You don't get this sort of intimate love letters which are quite which talk about love making and things very often, as you know, in the Tudor period. It's just not something you come across very often. Anyway, then obviously someone gets cold feet, and then the sort of cell doors are sort of more firmly locked. But needless to say, Catherine is pregnant again.
It's astonishing. It's astonishing. It's like also the the bravery and the courage of it as well.
I think it's young people simply and madly in love and will do just
just losing it.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens there? Oh, yes. So now the problem for Elizabeth, when of course eventually it comes out again, and she has another son, a second son. And the problem for Elizabeth here is that in English law and in English canon law of this period, a marriage is just a declaration of intent followed by consummation, followed by sex. So this couple have, because they've been interviewed in the Tower endlessly, but including by the Archbishop of Canterbury, they have made their intent to marry very, very plain, very publicly to everyone. And they have clearly had sex and now had a baby. So there's no way this marriage isn't legit, because you don't need a priest to marry.
Right.
In fact,
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Law, you marry each other. A priest doesn't marry you. So yeah. So that's anyway. So at this point, Elizabeth, of course, is again very upset. Catherine, by the way, which I think is quite interesting, keeps little monkeys and dogs. She has lots of pets which have been destroying her rooms in the Tower. So the lieutenant of the Tower, who himself is now he was thrown into prison the first time round, actually, the first corridor creeping. But the new lieutenant of the Tower, I think, is probably quite glad to see the back of her, because basically she's been ruining her room because she's got all these small dogs and small monkeys destroying it.
And do we know where she was held in the Tower?
I don't know which room she was held in the Tower, but I mean, I know the various places she was held in since.
Yes.
And then what was very tragic was that she is very much the focus of a lot of attention, because a lot of people, like William Cecil, not least, are desperate for Elizabeth to name Catherine and her sons as her heir, which Elizabeth absolutely will not do. There's all sort of pressure on Elizabeth to do this. And Catherine, meanwhile, is shunted off and separated from Ned, and separated from her eldest son as well, interestingly. Is shunted off to these country house prisons, and becomes very depressed, and eventually sort of starves herself and dies of a broken heart, really, age only 28.
Oh my goodness, it really has all the drama and the tragedy. And
Yeah.
I just want to ask you a question, because Gail, thank you so much, Gail. I've been waiting to ask your question about, if they had asked permission, could Elizabeth have found a good reason to refuse?
Yes. I don't think she would have needed a good reason. She wouldn't have needed a good reason. She'd just have said no. It's sort of, I don't approve of this marriage. She wouldn't have had to give any reason.
And that would have been it. Enough.
No.
The Queen says. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got one tragic. We've got a couple of illegitimate boys around now. But and one tragic story. But what about Mary, the younger sister? Can you tell us a little bit about her? Because it's almost like unbelievable that it happens once and then it sort of happens again.
I know, I know. Young people fall in love and they'll do crazy things. So Mary is very different in many ways from Catherine. Um, Catherine, yes, well, we'll come back, I think, to sort of pictures of Catherine, but
Yes.
Mary was described rather cruelly by the imperial ambassador as crook-backed and very ugly. She was very short. She was the smallest person at court. I think she had scoliosis, which of course Richard III, as we now know, had, and it's an inheritable condition. So she may have inherited it through, down through Elizabeth of York. Elizabeth of York didn't have it, of course, but she may have carried the gene. Anyway, Mary had this, so she was the smallest person at court. And she fell in love with the biggest man at court, something that William Cecil described as monstrous when it emerged. This man called Thomas Keyes, he was in charge of palace security. And in those days, of course, everyone was armed. There was no paracetamol. So if you were in pain, you were in pain. You were in pain and you were armed. And you were very young, probably, as well. So it was, quite fun. So you needed to be a big chap to control all these very entitled, armed young men.
Right.
Hooray Henrys with swords.
Too much arrogance, too much
Yes.
youth,
Yes.
too much testosterone.
Yes. Plenty of alcohol,
Yes.
So so you needed to be a big guy. And he was. Now they fell in love, and Mary, and this was 1565, and a few years after. So Catherine was already in the Tower at this stage, or had been even kicked out of the Tower and was in some terrible country house by this stage. I think she was indeed. So it wasn't as if Mary wasn't warned what might happen if she married. But I think what she felt was that, okay, Catherine married a nobleman who could very easily become King of England, who would make a very suitable King of England. The man I'm in love with is a commoner. He would never be acceptable as a King of England. And indeed, their mother's second marriage had also been to a commoner, and had also been, in a way, a sort of message to Mary Tudor to say, I'm not interested in the crown. I've married, one of my servants.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting when I was reading about that and listening to you talk about that. And I think that says quite a lot about the woman and her. She must have been shrewd, intelligent, on it, and prepared to do the right thing for her family.
Yes, absolutely. And there are advantages as well. If you were a great aristocrat yourself, royal indeed in their case, and you married someone of lower status, it also gave you a certain amount of power in your marriage. I mean, women, had no money, no rights. As soon as you were married, you belonged to your husband, and widows had a lovely time. I mean, widows had marvelous because they were sort of women with their own money, they had their own power. But but if you were a great woman, and instead of marrying another great man who was you're going to be pushed around by him, or could easily be, if you marry a servant, there are advantages to that. Anyway.
Yes, back to our story.
In Mary's case, I don't think there was going to be any advantage, apart from the fact that you might be allowed to marry him because he wasn't going to be a threat to Elizabeth. So that was great. But she didn't want to take any chances. So again, she waited until Elizabeth had left, go off to a party to get married. I can't remember which palace it was in now. Isn't that awful? Anyway, so they got, so Elizabeth was offered a party, and she and Mr. Keyes got married secretly. And again, there are lots of wonderful descriptions of this sort of candlelit wedding and the rings he gave her and all these sort of things. Very sweet. But unfortunately, again, it did come out in public, and Elizabeth was again very annoyed. because she obviously decided Thomas Keyes wasn't grand enough to go into the Tower, so he was sent off to the Fleet prison. He was stuffed into a small cell, which was quite miserable for a very large man. And Mary was imprisoned for a long time, actually, at Chequers, which is the country house, which our prime ministers use. And her room, the prison room, is still there and still has her graffiti on the walls. Yeah.
Have you been? Have you seen it?
I haven't been to Chequers, but I have seen the pictures and the letters from there. And they've got pictures of sort of figures with wings and things, as if she's sort of dreaming of sort of flying away from.
And has she written her name? Is that how we know it's her?
Yes, it's all her. Yes, it's her graffiti. And she was in prison there. And they had exactly, there were her letters as well, pleading. And she calls herself at first in her letters. She calls herself Mary Grey to Elizabeth. But this changes, interestingly, because Keyes is released eventually. And he's sort of obviously not very well, and Mary asks if she can join him, and she's not allowed to. She's told, no, you can't. And Keyes dies, and Mary obviously never forgives Elizabeth for this, and she starts referring to herself as Mary Keyes, and there's a portrait of her as well, where she's literally holding her sort of hand like this, saying, wedding ring. Stupid virgin queen, no virgin there. Yeah, anyway, so but her life does sort of get better, because she's sort of kept in prison for a few more years, but she is eventually released and does return to court. And there's descriptions of her carriage and the sort of black and yellow dresses she wears. Now, she's rather small. I was sort of thinking of herself as looking like a bumblebee in black and yellow in the 70s. Anyway, she is obviously living with her a stepdaughter. So she's obviously was bringing up, or was close to, her husband's children by an earlier marriage. He was obviously a widower when they married. Yeah. So yeah. And so again, it's a very romantic story. She's obviously very bright, Mary, as well. She goes everywhere. This mountain of books she takes with her everywhere. Her books and rubbish, one of her jailers describes it as.
Yes, I read that quote from you. I thought, oh, that's harsh, isn't it? Gosh. But she seems like she prevailed. She kind of.
Yeah, she does. Yes.
Which is sort of some glimmer of light in here.
Yes.
So I'm just going to read a couple of comments. Cynthia's saying, so sad that the sisters and their beloved were treated so poorly. And Kira's just, I don't know whether this is just kind of reflective question. Why did Elizabeth treat Mary and Thomas so harshly? There were literally no threat. I mean, thank you both for the comments and the questions that are coming through. But yeah, I mean, she just really hated them, didn't she? She just.
I don't know. It's interesting. I agree. I mean, she could have been a bit. I think that she wanted to send a message out with Mary, who didn't, as you say, pose a threat. That she was not to be messed with on the subject of the succession, or on who would marry and who wouldn't. She would not be disobeyed. She would not be treated for a fool. I think that's what she probably was angry about, that she'd been taken for a fool, really, by Mary marrying again, another secret marriage.
Yeah. And just so we can all get ourselves tuned in, over what period of time does this happen post Elizabeth's succession? Is it all within 5 years, 10 years?
No, it's longer than that. Because I'm sort of in the middle of another book, and this is it. So exactly. So as far as I recall, Catherine dies in 1568. It's just literally sort of weeks before, I think, Mary, Queen of Scots, arrives in England.
Okay.
And then Mary dies in, I think, 1578. But of course, there are still others around, other cousins. Elizabeth, as you know, never names an heir, And when Catherine's eldest son, believe it or not, also falls in love and marries, without his father's permission, he marries a gentlewoman, again, not a great noblewoman, not a suitable queen consort. So Elizabeth actually is delighted about that and lets that marriage go ahead.
Okay,
it's like,
right.
yes, he's made a really bad marriage. Hooray!
Yeah, hooray. And do you know what I was just thinking? I was just pondering. So the Grey sisters were the grandchildren of Charles Brandon. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just thinking of Charles Brandon's little sort of event with Mary when he went without permission from Henry. It runs in the family.
Really, no, absolutely, really does. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yes.
I think
And that was Mary, wasn't it? Really, who was particularly drove that.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Her granddaughters inherited her passion. Certainly, her younger two granddaughters did.
Yeah. Family traits, I think we might be able to say. They're quite headstrong and determined women.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Women of force. Even if
Yeah,
short stature, women of force.
yeah.
So Zach has asked, thank you, Zach. Why did Tudor children have such a high mortality rate?
Well, I think it was. Well, it was partly no antibiotics. I mean, before the advent of antibiotics, you caught diseases, you died, and it depends which class you're talking about. So, the poor could be more easily, weakened by hunger during years of bad harvests. There were endemic diseases, the plague. They had this terrible illness called the sweating sickness, which had appeared around the time of the Battle of Bosworth. And then disappeared 100 years later, really, which killed, for example, the Charles Brandon's.
Yes, heirs. Yes,
exactly, the half, yeah. So there was that. I think as well. Also, court women would sometimes send off their sort of babies to be sort of breastfed in villages by wet nurses, and of course, then they would get whatever bugs flying around in the villages. So there are all sorts of ways a baby could die.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much. And I've got a couple of things I really want to ask you because unbelievably we're coming up to 10 to 6. I don't know where the time has gone. But I really wanted to ask you about objects in particular, objects and places, because Tudor Travel Guide, I'm all about places. And so a couple of things. Let me ask one question at a time without getting too overexcited. First of all, I was really interested to hear you talking in your lecture online about what you discovered about where Mary Grey was buried. Perhaps you could tell us about that and that process of uncovering that.
Yes. Well, no one knew where Mary Grey, the youngest, was buried. And then I discovered this manuscript in the College of Arms, which had been miscatalogued, and it, as a daughter of some other Grey, or sort of random Grey, you might say, and it turned out to be the funeral details of the funeral procession for Mary Grey, and it described who was there. And they included, spookily, for example, Catherine Grey's last jailer. He was in the funeral procession for Mary Grey, and was himself of illegitimate Tudor descent, I may say. Someone called he's someone called Owen, as in Owen Tudor. And there was also a lady in waiting, one of Lady Jane Grey's former lady in waiting, a name associated with Lady Jane Grey's ladies in waiting, was also at this funeral procession. And she was buried in her mother's tomb in Westminster Abbey. And her mother's tomb is, marvelous. It's got a proper effigy on it, but it doesn't mention Mary Grey, but she is buried with her mother in Westminster Abbey.
So that's where Mary's buried. Can you tell us what happened to Catherine after she died? Where was she buried? What happened to her? Because again, there's a bit of a story there as well, isn't there?
Well, yes, actually, she was buried at first in Suffolk, where she died, but then many years later, actually, just the beginning of the reign, just the end of James I's reign, the beginning of the reign of Charles I, their grandson, William, had, was it their father? Was it their? Yeah, no, it was Edward. Yeah, anyway, had them had her disinterred and built a magnificent tomb at Salisbury Cathedral for his, as I said, it was his parents. I'm getting the generations confused here for a minute. It was his son then takes over. And so if you go to Salisbury Cathedral, you'll see this wonderful tomb, which has the effigies of Catherine and Ned, with Catherine very much in the superior position as being royal. And it describes how they were separated in life, but how the lovers are now united in death. And it's a magnificent tomb. And if you go to Salisbury Cathedral, it's definitely worth going to see.
You see, I've been to Salisbury and I don't think I really even noticed it, which I feel shocked to say. So I'm going back now.
Yes, no, it really it's a very impressive tomb, definitely worth seeing.
And kind of on that same note, I mean, brilliant discovery about where Mary was buried. Congratulations for that. Was there anything else in the research process that you particularly enjoyed finding out, or that was kind of a bit new in terms of an angle, or indeed any particular artifact or place that you visited or sort of laid your hands on that was really interesting while you were researching?
I did see which is the original miniature done by Lavinia Tearlink of Katherine Grey holding her eldest son as a baby, and it's very much a sort of virgin and child picture. It's like it's the Christ child. This is the future king, the anointed. So that's why it's done this virgin, and it's the first. I believe it's the first ever secular picture of a mother and child in English art. And it's a beaver castle, and it's in the sort of private apartment, so it's not on public display. So it was very special seeing that. I must say it's very beautiful, and it's rather an extraordinary image and very touching.
Yeah, lovely little miniature. And I've talked to another guest about Lavinia Tearlink, but I didn't really realise until our chat today just how important that miniature really is and what it's really symbolising. So,
yes, yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. And in terms of places, we mentioned a couple of places. Obviously, we've got the Tower of London, we've got Salisbury Cathedral,
Westminster Abbey.
Sorry?
Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
Bradgate Park, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Any other places that you would point us towards that maybe they were at in their exile, or after they'd been kind of rusticated from court?
Well, Bradgate Park in Leicestershire is beautiful. On a lovely day like we had today, it's wonderful to go and walk in that park and amongst those ruins. And Mary Queen of Scots, Fotheringay, as well. Gosh, I just don't think if there's anywhere else associated with the Grey girls. There must be lots of places in London in particular.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would think, well, Bradgate is their childhood home in Leicestershire.
And I was also thinking Chequers, but I don't suppose we can rock up at the front door and say, do you mind?
It's a pity they don't open that to the public.
Yeah, once a year it should be opened. It's ridiculous.
And of course, it would have been nice to have seen lots of Mary Queen of Scots' artifacts at Arundel, but they were sort of nicked, weren't they, recently? When somebody was going around, it was open to the public, and somebody used it as an opportunity to case the joint and stole stole her rosary.
That's
I mean,
just terrible. But it is maybe worth just saying to anybody out there who's watching that currently at the British Library there is the Elizabeth and Mary exhibition, Rival Queens, which has some astonishing artifacts, including the checkers ring, which I'm so excited to see because I've never seen it before. That's going to be amazing, I think.
yes, no, I agree. Yes, it's exactly, it's a wonderful exhibition, and definitely one to go and see.
Yeah, so grab your tickets, folks. Get online. I think it's there till January or February time, so there is still time to get down there. But I think there is some wonderful artifacts. So yeah, it's got to be, I think, right at the top of the list of things to do if you're a Tudor fanatic at the moment.
Thinking of rings, there's one other ring I'd like to mention, although it no longer exists, sadly. But I'm thinking of Katherine Grey's story. When she's dying, she gives her jailer her rings to return to Ned, and one of them is a memento mori ring, and it has engraved on it, "While I lived, yours," which I think is very sort of moving.
Very moving. Just wish we still had it.
I know. You never know. Sometimes these things do.
Well, I can't believe it's 4 minutes to the hour. And so I think we've come to the end. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I particularly want to thank you, Leanda, for taking an hour out of your Saturday evening to come and join us and enlighten us, particularly about the Grey Sisters. Been a fascinating hour. Thank you. It's flown by for me. Really flown by.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
And so hopefully I'll see you around. And what we do need to ask you actually is, what are you working on currently and what can people look forward to from you?
Well, I am writing a biography. Well, it's about just finishing it actually, of Britain's most reviled queen consort, Henrietta Maria. And it's a revisionist biography, and it's going to reveal a woman who was in fact one of our most remarkable queens.
Wow.
And yeah, there'll be lots of new stuff to see. She's going to be an extraordinary heroine to read about.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds interesting. We love that. And when is that due out?
August, September.
Fantastic. So something to look forward to towards the end of the summer, folks. That's wonderful. And in the meantime, I just want to mention again, from a Tudor point of view, your sisters, the Sisters Who Would Be Queen, would be the book, wouldn't it? I guess for people to go to, having listened to this conversation, if they want more details.
Absolutely, The Sisters Who Would Be Queen, which is all about the Grey sisters, the tragedy of Jane, Catherine, and Mary Grey, or Tudor: The Family Story, which have all her other rivals: Mary, Queen of Scots, her cousin Frances, Margaret Clifford. So yes,
They're all in there. They're all in there. Well, let me just read you. As we've been just wrapping up there, we've had some people sort of showing their appreciation. So thank you for that, Kiri. Thank you. Amazing talk. Anna is saying, please come back, Leanda.
thank you.
Janet, thank you both very much. Cynthia, great to read your books. And Barb, thanks for the insightful and intriguing hour. And ooh, Henrietta Maria, love her, says Barb. So somebody else who loves Henrietta Maria. And Gail, so interesting. Thank you so much. So thank you again. And folks, if you just stick around for a moment. But it's bye from us for now, Leanda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
So yes, we are at the top of the hour with just a couple of minutes. So as ever, I just wanted to be able to say thank you again. I know we've had 2 Tudor talks this month, quite unusually, but I hope you've enjoyed them both. Now, there will not be a Tudor talk in December, but I hope that we will be returning in the new year in January. I actually don't have anybody booked yet, folks. So if you do have any particular favourites, people who you'd love to see on Tudor Talk, then drop me. You can either drop in the chat, or even better, put it in the description below, because that's sometimes the chat doesn't appear once I finish the recording. But if you put your suggestions in the chat below, I'll certainly pick them up. And also, you will also see in the description below, I've put links to the Sisters Who Would Be Queen book from Leanda. So if you just want to quickly go in, Amazon UK, Amazon US, you can get the books through those links there. So I've done the hard work for you folks. And so, yeah, I think hopefully we will be back at the beginning of January. Not quite sure of the date yet. And therefore, the best way to keep up to date with what I'm doing is to subscribe to my blog, www.thetudortravelguide. If you go onto the homepage, you will see you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also get a free gift from me as a thank you for joining the Tudor family. And that's the best way. I always send emails out to let folk know what I'm up to, what's coming next, whether it be podcasts or so on. And speaking of this, the final thing I want to say is I've just launched the latest podcast over on, it's on all major podcasting platforms, and it's all about shaping femininity, an interview with Sarah Bendel, who spent her academic career researching the finer details of women's Tudor undergarments. What a fascinating subject that is. And there's an accompanying blog all about the busk. Now, if you don't know about the busk, I urge you to go and read about it. What a fascinating, mysterious and erotic double life the busk once lived. Anyway, you can find that on my blog. So that's it. It is 6 o'clock. Our time is up, folks. Have a lovely rest of day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for all your comments. I'll have a quick look at those once I finish the recording, and I'll see you on Tudor Talk in the new year. Okay, I'm going to wish you a happy Christmas. Bye for now.